The International Energy Agency released its 2018 World Energy Outlook last week. And as part of that, they have a sustainable development scenario for the world to achieve carbon neutrality by some mid-century sort of date. And their estimate is $69 trillion is the amount of energy that's required, as Gary suggests, first and foremost, simply to recreate the energy system that we have today in terms of scale and size necessary to power the global economy. And at the same time, to transform that energy system into a green alternative that does not continue to pollute the planet's atmosphere with carbon dioxide emissions, right? So this is power the global economy and decarbonize it at the same time, which is an enormous enough challenge. The reason I like to put this number up when I start to talk about these kinds of issues is that the problem is that most people look at numbers like this and they treat it as a cost, right? So this is the cost that we have to pay for environmental protection, right? To have a sustainable energy future. And if you look at it like that, it's kind of freaky to think that the global economy is going to have to pay $69 trillion to clean up its act, if you will. And so I think one of the core things that we've been grappling with is that that's too high a price to pay just to get carbon neutrality. Carbon neutrality is, of course, a critical goal for the future of the planet. But it's not sufficient if you're talking about spending $69 trillion of the world's money to get a new energy system by mid-century, right? It's not sufficient. We need to get more out of our investments in our energy future than just an energy system that does what the existing energy system does in a carbon-free way. And so what is that more? That more, in some sense, is a value proposition for energy innovation, right? It is a high social rate of return on those energy investments. And to me, one of the easiest and most straightforward places to try to get that return on investment is to tackle global poverty and global inequality. Surprisingly enough, it's kind of hard to find data, even on the World Wide Web, that gives you the distribution of global earning. So this is 2011 data from Pew, right? So it's 7 years, nearly a decade out of date at this point. But it suggests that 70% of the world's population still lives on less than $10 a day. Purchasing power equity sort of numbers, right, if you will. There's an enormous opportunity to change the global economic future in front of us if we can think about how to do that. There is a deep link between energy access and poverty. And that is part and parcel of why the United Nations has articulated as goal number 7 on the Sustainable Development Goals, affordable energy for all, as an integral part of the Sustainable Development Goals. And by some measures, we are making significant progress on that objective. And so you can see in the dark blue inner circle where the Sustainable Energy for All program thinks we are with respect to energy access in 2014, where the International Energy Agency expects us to be in 2030, and where the Sustainable Energy for All objective is for 2030, right? The idea of getting us to 100% energy access. But that kind of an on-off energy access measure, I think most of us now realize, significantly underestimates the depth of the energy access problem. And so if we look at the multi-tier framework that the Sustainable Energy for All program has put together, with help from folks like Practical Action and others, right? We recognize that energy access isn't an on-off thing, right? It isn't, you either have electricity as we do here, where, you know, our reliability statistics are measured in hours of non-access per year, right? Those are the standards that our electric utilities in Arizona are held to. Less than hours of unreliability per year, right? That kind of a standard is remarkably rare in the world's energy systems. That in fact, most of the world's energy systems do not deliver anything like the level of energy services that folks in the United States, for the most part, take for granted as the basic infrastructural foundations of a modern economy. Tier 3 has been proposed by some as an extreme lower limit, right? Not tier 0 or tier 1 or tier 2, but tier 3, right? In this framework has been, right, as an extreme lower limit for global ambitions, right? But what you see here in this figure, and there's actually not yet a great deal of data at the global scale or even at the national scale for thinking about the multi-tier framework in detail. But what you see here is that if you just measure, and this is in one city, Kinshasa, the on-off energy access metric, it looks like you have 90% energy access. But if you measure the tiers 0, 1, and 2, which are below tier 3, 79% of the population still has less than tier 3 energy access, right? So in a place where we look like we're getting very close to the numbers that Sustainable Energy for All wants by 2030, that 100% number, on the binary on-off metric, we're not anywhere close when we start to think about this in a more nuanced way. I actually don't know what the Sustainable Energy for All program was measuring when they measured these numbers. These are in their original publication, the 3-page Beyond Connection pamphlet that they put out on the multi-tier framework. But if you take this seriously as a measure of global energy access, you see that those numbers in Kinshasa are, by these numbers, representative, fully representative of the world's population. that tier 0 access significantly underperforms the binary on-off access, off metric, right? The folks who don't have energy access. There are significantly more folks worldwide who are counted by the IEA and others as having energy access who still fall into tier 0. And that the numbers in tier 1 and tier 2 are comparable to those in tier 0. Elsewhere, we have other kinds of problems with respect to the linkages between energy and poverty. So, yes, today, part of the challenge in Puerto Rico is that much of the island remains without power. More today than yesterday because they had a power plant explode overnight that put a number of cities back in darkness. But even before Maria, the island of Puerto Rico, which has an average per capita income of roughly half of the next lowest per capita income of any state in the United States. So this is the poorest part of the United States, was spending $8 million a day to buy carbon from off-island to power their electricity system and to power their automobile transportation system, amounting to $3 billion a year, which has contributed significantly both to the creating a drag on the economy and also to the overall indebtedness of the community. This is not a problem that Puerto Rico shares by itself. This is data for Minnesota. If you are below 50% of the poverty line, if you're a family that's below 50% of the poverty line in Minnesota, you're spending 30% of your income on energy. %, if you're in that, if you're still below the poverty line, but slightly higher income. And these numbers are reflective of many other parts of the United States as well. We've been talking to folks at the Philadelphia Energy Authority who see very similar numbers for low-income communities and low-income small businesses within the city center area. And Philadelphia has the highest poverty rate of any major urban area in the United States. So we need to find ways to change this relationship between energy and poverty that stems from these two big linkages that I've talked about, but from many other relationships between energy and poverty as well. And I think that requires us to rethink some of the basic ways that we imagine energy. We have had a paradigm in this country and in many other places around the world for the last half century that's been dominated by techno-economics. One of the things that we do is look at the history of energy in the United States, and it's very clear where this came from. It came from the thinking of folks like Samuel Insull and others who invented the modern electric utility in places like Chicago. And they built a business and technology framework that put everything in terms of the relationships between these two questions, right? How much energy are you going to generate? Using what technology? And at what cost to the producer? Right? This is the fundamental paradigm that we have operated in. I think we need a new paradigm, one that I think captures very much the new thinking at the United Nations around the Sustainable Development Goals. That the challenge is to find ways to link solutions to the multiple Sustainable Development Goal challenges. Right? So can we find ways to transform energy imagination into a paradigm for social investment? Right? That energy innovation is a way to address poverty challenges. Right? To create sustainable cities and communities, to improve education, to create peace, justice, and democracy, to end hunger, good health, reduced inequalities, and promoting work and economic growth. Right? Energy is tied to all of these things. Those of us who work in the energy access field know this. Right? We know that if we can deliver energy systems that actually work for people, we can help achieve all of these goals. So how do we put that at the center of our thinking? So we've been thinking about this, and we have identified what we think of as sort of 7 key ideas. The first is that energy investments are worthwhile when they create social value. We'll tell you more about that and what that means in a minute. Oh, wait, never mind. I forgot I had another slide in there. So social value, just broadly, when we think about it, the economic benefits of energy use, all the other social benefits of energy use, minus any risks, burdens, injustices, etc., that are created through new energy systems, integrated and distributed across the full life cycle. Right? It's a highly abstract notion. We're going to get much more specific over the next 3 days. Second key idea, social value is created not by energy, but by energy services, right? By what people are able to do with that energy. People don't care about energy. They care about what they can do with energy. And so it's all about energy services. And practical action and their total energy access framework have been critical to our thinking about how do we understand what that means in terms of the diversity of energy services that ideally we're creating. Third key idea, the delivery of socially valuable energy services requires designing new socio-technical arrangements. We got to actually make that energy work for people, right? And that means thinking about how the people part is connected to the technology part. I'm regularly stymied when, I don't know if the rest of you have this problem, but every time I go to Europe or Latin America or some other part of the world, I always forget the plug attachment that I need to change my electricity from one standard to the next. And, that socio-technical arrangement's what I'm talking about here. We've got to actually, you can't just say that you've delivered energy. You have to figure out what's the arrangement that enables the people to put that energy to work where they need it to do the things they need it to do. So imagining, designing, building, operating, maintaining, and scaling those new socio-technical arrangements requires expertise, work, and organization. You can't just hope it's going to happen. You've got to organize for it. The social value of energy, we suggest, will grow significantly if those organizations that are mobilizing energy services are reinvesting in the energy communities, in the communities that they're serving. If you think about what drove the relationship between modern electric utilities in the United States and the cities that they served, it was precisely this reinvestment logic, right? That by growing those utilities, you were growing local economies, growing local workforces, etc. That all of this requires innovative ecosystems, networks, and supply chains that link those organizations that are doing this work out into global networks that can help them do that work and provide them with the materials, the supplies, the relationships, the financing, etc. And then finally, of course, we can't just imagine this into being. We need policy and governance support for this new way of thinking about energy. Virtually all existing energy systems fail to implement all of these ideas. Right? So I think that we have a huge challenge in front of us, but I think it's a good challenge. So for our challenge for the next 3 days is to bring these ideas down to the scale of the community and think about how do we create social value through energy innovation. We've organized the 3 days around 3 questions. Today is about that question in a concrete, pragmatic sense. How do we create social value through energy innovation? Tomorrow, the longest of the 3 days. Get lots of good sleep tonight. We're going to really work you hard tomorrow. It's going to be a very long day. How do we organize energy enterprises to do this work of creating social value? And then Wednesday morning, what kind of tools, frameworks, ecosystems, policies, governance arrangements do we need to support this work? How do we need to change the thinking of the big institutions to enable this activity? So let me come back to you with another big number. This one is 50% bigger than the last one. People freak out when I tell them that it's going to cost $69 trillion to fix the global energy system. This is the amount of cash that BlackRock International estimates is sitting in bank accounts, in savings accounts and checking accounts worldwide right now. $99 trillion in cash. Earning, well, if it's in the US, earning something around less than 0.25% interest annually at the moment. Right? And yet it's still sitting there. So we could afford to fix the global energy system out of cash, out of pocket cash, folks, worldwide. We could do this. But here's the thing, Keith, it's like going, yeah! But you got to give them a value proposition, folks. What are we going to get out of this? How do we maximize the global social return on that $69 trillion investment in energy innovation? That's a challenge, I think, for us to think about. How are we going to do this so that we are making an investment not just in a decarbonized global economy, right, but in a new era of the human future? So thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate it. We are tremendously enthused about the opportunity to spend the next 3 days with you. And we're really looking forward to the conversations that we're going to have and to the results of those conversations. And so as our president here at ASU, Michael Crow, likes to say, think big and think well. So thank you all very much for being here.